SQL command, and the interpreter executes that command, leading to a lot of other problems. So in the case of APIs, that usually does not happen, and that is because APIs are modern applications, and most modern developers are utilizing ORMs. So that's why injection is number 8 here versus number 1 in domain. Preventing injection. Validate, filter, and sanitize anything that the client gives. Do not take that data as is and feed it to the interpreter. Preferably use a whitelist approach, so only allow what the application should expect and only allow that input. Special characters should be escaped or encoded so that they can be consumed by the application. But again, do some processing on it. Do not formulate queries by consuming untrusted data as is. Don't trust what's coming from the client. Improper assets management. So with so many endpoints that are being exposed, proper management of those exposed endpoints is necessary. As I mentioned, these days developers are releasing code all the time, sometimes hundreds of times a day. So what may happen is if you're not managing those endpoints, if you don't know what is being exposed, then it could lead to problems. So there are two main ways of having improper asset management. One is the lack of documentation. We should know what our APIs are supposed to do, what kind of input they take, where do they fail, what is the kind of response they give. So we need to have proper documentation for APIs. So in this case, it shows that there's these two that have proper documentation, but we don't know exactly what it does. It can lead to application failures. It can lead to unforeseen issues with the application. The application may perform in a way that you didn't intend for it to perform, and that's because we don't know how this works. It's not documented. The second problem with improper access management related to APIs is unknown API hosts. So as I mentioned, developers are releasing code all the time. If they expose something and then they forget about it and it's out there and it's vulnerable, then it could cause a breach, so it could cause problems. So that's why have proper documentation and have an inventory of those hosts. So inventory all hosts to document the API environment. So whether it's a production API, staging, whether it's test, QA, development, and then what kind of access that API needs, whether it's public, internal, whether it's between partners, and so on. Document important aspects about the API, such as authentication. Does this API require authentication? If so, how do we authenticate? What kind of errors does it run into? Is the rate limiting possible? Do we need to limit the amount of requests that are coming in? Do we need to limit the amount of response that is going to be returned to us when this API gets executed? What's the cross-origin resource sharing policy? What are the parameters that the API expects? And the most important is to document what is the sample request and response for that API. What is it that it's expecting and what is it it's going to return once it fulfills the request. Limit access to anything that should not be public. Generate documentation automatically with the help of tools. So we have tools like Swagger that you can utilize. API 10, insufficient logging and monitoring. I want to point out this is also the A10 on the website. So insufficient logging and monitoring is also seen irrespective of whether it's an API application or a web application. So it's a problem across the board. Lack of proper logging, monitoring, and alerting can let attacks go unnoticed. So there was a research that was done that said that average time to detect a breach is about 200 days. That's a long time for the bad guy to be exploiting your system. Attacks that go unnoticed could be worsened because attackers will try to maintain persistence. They will try to pivot to other systems. They will try to go further into your network. And they will try to tamper, extract, and destroy the data that you have within your network. So being alerted to a breach sooner means quicker incident response. So how do we prevent this? Log all failed authentication attempts. Bad guys often target authentication because they know once they get past the authentication, they will be able to be a normal user of the application. So they target authentication a lot. So log all of your login failed authentication. That way you can later on do investigation and figure out whether it was a legit hack or not. Protect logs as highly sensitive. So protect logs from being forged. I want to talk about these 2 points together because bad guys, when they actually hack a system, they will go after your logs if they are able to. They want to hide their traps. They want to delete the logs of their activity. They want to add malicious entries to your log to confuse the investigators. They will forge the logs. So protect your logs from these 2 problems. Logs need to be integrated into a SIEM system that will allow for automated alerting and monitoring of those logs. So it's important. There's so many logs that get generated by an application, it's impossible for a human to keep an eye on it 24/7. So that's why leverage a SIEM system. You can set certain thresholds, and when certain threshold is met, appropriate personnel can be alerted of events. While logging is necessary, please do not log sensitive information. Do not log passwords, PIN, credit card number, social security numbers. They are not needed. That was the API Security Top 10. Any questions before we get into roadmap? All right. So this is just where this whole project is from OWASP. So as I mentioned, in Q4, the top 10 was released recently. They are working on a cheat sheet which will allow us, the community, to understand how do we protect these APIs. So some of the common practices, some of the common things to keep in mind to protect those APIs. And then they are going to release the CR API, which stands for Completely Ridiculous API. This is an intentionally vulnerable API system that you can use to learn about how to test for things, how to basically how those vulnerabilities work, how do bad guys exploit those vulnerabilities. These are the references, and I'm done. Any questions? So you can ask me questions about this, or we can also talk about AppSec, whatever. If you have any questions, yes.
How did you get into AppSec?
Good question. They have heard that story. So I was looking for a job in a SOC, and I was a graduate student. There was a company that came in for interviewing people. They interviewed me. I wanted to work in their SOC. A few weeks later, they called me and they said they wanted to interview me. I said, for what position? They said, don't worry about the position. You just come and talk to us. So I went and talked to us, and they liked what I had to say. In the interview, I said, I want to work in your SOC. And anyway, they gave me a job in AppSec. And I think that was the best thing that happened to me because I got to work with the OWASP leaders, and I really learned from them. And so I'm very happy to be where I am. What else? Sure.
So how did you go about meeting OWASP?
But they work for the company that I work
Wow.
for. So that's where I'm. Yes.
What resources do you use to actually be ahead of new vulnerabilities and I guess practices like you're saying right now they're showing what people are attacking and what they're trying to do. What resources do you use for that?
So OWASP is a good starting point. I would say there's a lot of security blogs that I follow just to keep up with what's going on in the industry, what's the latest hack. If you want to learn about applications themselves, I recommend that when you're browsing the internet, have an interception proxy in place. And then later on, just skim through the traffic. What did you try to do and how did the application act? And that way you can learn about how the applications actually work. What else? Yes?
I'm not sure if I missed it, but at what stage of the software development do you come in and say, okay, are you at the testing stage or doing the development, but how do you participate in the development stage is what
That's a great question. So when I first started, we were getting into the testing phase, but testing is too late.
Yeah.
So right now, the way our processes work, as soon as a product owner comes up with an idea, they get in touch with these guys. They get in touch with my team. And they say, this is what we are trying to do. And then we get into a conversation with them. Okay, if you're trying to do this, keep in mind that you would need to do this, and this from a security perspective. And so we partner with them early on.
them as in the developers, or the app developers, or the
Product.
service provider?
Yes, the development groups. What else?
How important is it to get, do you think, if at all, to get have your master's for this certain area?
I will always be a proponent of degrees and certifications, but it is not needed. In the end, what matters is what you know. So, yeah, that's all I have to say.
Jump on school.
All right, see.
I guess further to that point, like I'm kind of interested in security, but I'm just looking at like a degree in computer science with software engineering as my concentration. What kind of things, like if I wanted to get an internship with you guys, what kind of experiences or skills would you be looking for for those kind of things?
It would depend on what you want to do in security. If you want to get into application security, having some sort of a development background will be great, but it is not needed. I don't have a developer background outside of my school projects, my grad school projects. But it is very good if you start in development first, understand the whole software development, how to create a software before you start thinking of how to break a software.
Okay.
If you're looking more into the monitoring side, then go for appropriate internships in those times.
So all of you guys, are you guys like developers as well, or what's your background?
So I majored in cybersecurity. I did computer science. He's a computer science.
Oh, okay.
And they both started as interns, and they are now full-time. I actually have 5 UTSA people working for me right now. I'm so happy with the knowledge you guys bring to the table. Yes?
This is another, given the scenario of like, maybe this may or may not be considered an API security or not. As a service provider, as an application service provider through the API calls, should the providers be worried that the API could then be used by somebody else to provide additional service to other providers? So let's say, for example, I have First Bank that's provided an API to me, and I use that API call to then sell those calls to like other, and I make more profit through that. As Frost Bank or in your place, should you be worried about that, or that I'm making profit out of the API call that I'm actually getting from you? Or like, is there a mechanism to try to trace and limit as to what I can access and sell it to a higher price or more vendors or however that works?
So that is more of a legal question. From a security standpoint, I can say that the API that we are exposing should only be used for what we are exposing.
Right. But there's not like a mechanism for you to say that it should only go to me but not beyond what I provide, right?
That I'm not sure. But regarding whether you can make profit off of it, I'm pretty sure that there would be some legal contract that would say that you can't do it, or you can do it for certain profit.
Right. So to that point, we had somebody, I think last semester, talking about APIs, and it's like, I guess for Frost, I would imagine an API might be just, as a techie person, maybe I want to be able to check my balance, like with the proper security things. I'm not going to be able to sell my ability to check my balance. Like, you're not going to pay me for that. But for like if they wanted to have an API for banking in general, and they give that to you, and then you sell it, they're going to charge you for that access. If you sell it to other people, then you're going to be using more accesses, and they're going to make money off of you. So.
But in that case, we would be exposing the API with the purpose of you making money off of it so that we can make money.
So there's a legal standpoint also comes in and says.
I'm not a lawyer, I don't want to say that. So, yeah, don't quote me on that. Yes?
Can you talk about your team and like what areas of like development, deployment cycles you all have like feet in?
Absolutely. So we have a team of 7 people plus a full-time contractor plus myself. We work with developers from start of development to the end of development. We also work with lines of businesses as they are trying to acquire software. As I mentioned, we try to get engaged sooner in the process. We meet with them on a periodic basis to figure out what are the things you're working on. These are the things we know you are working on. Is there anything else that you're working on that is not here? So if so, let's talk about it. Then we go into the requirements of, if you're working on this thing, these are the things we want you to keep in mind. After requirements, we get into the design phase. We say, okay, how are you going to solve this problem that you first identified that you want to achieve? In the design, we can either do architecture review, where we review the architecture of how this application is going to work using data flow diagrams, data flow analysis, to find where the data might be exposed to a bad guy. This is a very simplified version. Then we also do what we call agile threat modeling, where we sit down with the line of business on what they're working on and talk for only 15 minutes. We say, okay, what are you working on? We ask them 3 questions. What are you working on? What can go wrong? And what are you going to do about it? And we help them think about security. And we help facilitate that conversation. The third type of thing we do in architecture reviews is more of a deep dive. We do a manual testing of one feature of the application, for example, authentication. We try to hone in how is authentication working for this application? What pieces are being sent by what component to what component, and take a very close view of how this authentication is working and where the flaws may be. Another thing we do is, it's more of a compliance check, just to see if the authentication technology that you're using is good enough for, based on FFIC, since we're a bank, based on FFIC guidelines. Then moving on to the coding stage, we are doing static analysis, static code analysis. Some of the teams, most of the teams are doing automated analysis, but there's a couple of teams that are still relying on manual code reviews. When they do manual code reviews, we help them understand these are the things we want you to look for in your code. Make sure you look for null checks, make sure you're validating input, make sure you're using parameterized queries, and so on and so forth. We also have software composition analysis in the integration phase, where we want to identify any vulnerable components that your application may be using. Then we do dynamic analysis. We execute security checks, automated security checks on non-prod environments to identify things in the testing phase. At this point, we might also run a pre-production penetration test. Otherwise, we'll do the penetration testing after we go live. And then we also do continuous app monitoring that I mentioned, where we are continuously looking at applications in the production environment to see if there's any configuration changes, any low-hanging fruit. I think that covers it.
That's like the whole process.
There's more.
What did I miss then? Did I miss something? All right. So, what are the questions? Yes.
I work security for the military, and one of the hardest things is convincing generals and other individuals that security is really important. They just see it as a waste of money, or it just slows down the process. So how do you convince stakeholders, or even just the product owners themselves, that this is absolutely necessary?
That's an excellent question, and since I rolled out this program from scratch, I had to deal with exactly that. I would take findings to a developer, he would say this is not a problem. I would say, tell me why it is not a problem. So you engage in conversation with them. And then I was able to demonstrate to them why this is a problem. I was able to use tools like Burp and show them this can be exploited in this way. And then I gained their trust. And once you gain their trust, that trust will go a long way. So what I would say is, listen to them first. See what they have to say. And then help them understand your perspective and engage in that conversation. What are the questions? Yes?
For that code review process that they do you also do that for internal stuff, or is it just external?
Both. Any application that's written for us or by us, we do that automated code scan. Any other questions? All right, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
I'm ready for